Good evening, I'm Sharad Kuttan and welcome to Consider This. The show tries to update you on some of the latest news and current affairs issues. Now, tomorrow we celebrate the 20th anniversary of SUHAKAM, of the National Human Rights Commission. And with me tonight I have Jerald Joseph. He's a member, a second-term member of the Commission, and he's going to help us understand where the Commission is going to be taking the country with it as it goes along. 20 years is a long time, Jerald. You've also only been with them for 3 years, right? Yeah. You get another 3-year term, I understand. Tell us, you cast your mind back to 20 years ago when the whole idea of a National Human Rights Commission was mooted. There was some disquiet and some skepticism. Musa Hitam, who was very closely associated because with the Barisan National Government, was going to be its first chairperson. It was housed under Wisma Putra. People thought, well, this is going to be a whitewash. What was do you remember what your own reactions were like?
Well, I was an activist then in the NGO world, so you're right. We absolutely thought that this was symbolic show, that the whole world was doing it. So yeah, you needed something of this nature called a Human Rights Commission. But it was started off with so much of government support and people, including its seconded officers. It was in the vicinity of a government building, but now in hindsight, you think there was a starting times, you know. So I think our initial reaction, if I remember, was even the set of commissioners in the first few sets were largely civil service experience or retired civil service to helm a human rights commission. So that already sprung a lot of light bulbs, like, hey, you need human rights expertise, you know, not government expertise to be human rights commissioners.
Right. But I understand, Jerald, and correct me if I'm wrong, that actually there are global standards for the setting up of a human rights commission, that in fact there's something called the Paris Principles in which human rights commissions are best set up. And to what extent does SUHAKAM now conform to those Paris Principles?
So I think just as you're talking about history, SUHAKAM needs, and every Human Rights Commission needs to be accredited by this international body in the UN in Geneva every 5 years. So the status A, B or C is very important to show your compliance with a good set of international standards. That's what Paris Principle is called.
All right, they actually assess
the we are status A now.
All right,
and next year we're going to be reassessed, and we hope that we can defend our status A. But going back in history, when we were going to be reassessed in 2008 or 9, the NGO world led by Swaram and the NGO I was with, we all put our names together to actually write a letter to that accreditation body for the downgrading of SUHAKAM from A to B. It sounds like a terrible thing to do, but it's the only thing to do.
And deeply ironic, because now that you are a member of SUHAKAM.
Exactly.
But tell us why. What were the concerns then about the conduct of SUHAKAM, or its structure, its relationship with government?
So I think the first was the selection. That's always important. Paris Principle says the selection must be open, transparent.
Selection of commissions.
Commissions, and the competencies must be put out. This was never known, you know. At that time, it was a direct appointment by the Prime Minister. So that was one of the more important issues that was brought up for amendment by law. And the others was the type of issues that the Commission would take up, you know. How much of the critical issues would they be able to stand up to government and speak the voice as an independent commission. So the word independent is that crucially important one you always want to defend. And at that time, many people thought that we were not up the mark, SUHAKAM. And so it was not us who put that letter, it was the committee that sent a letter to SUHAKAM, say you are going to be imminent downgrading to B. Please give it's sort of a show cause letter why you think you should be A. And that's when that started swirling around, and we told the government amend, change. I think SUHAKAM had done some amendment proposal to the government, but they were not really taking it seriously. But at the height of almost imminent downgrade, that time I think the Minister of Law was Nazri, Dr. Nazri. He then pushed amendment round 1 with some changes. Selection from Prime Minister came down to a selection committee, but they were still not happy because the hand of the selection committee was still not clear. Then went round 2 amendment in Parliament. Of course, I remember the government accusing us of being Western agents and anti-Malaysian and the normal likes, you know. But they still went ahead to do it in order to save the Malaysian, our dignity, our face, which was good. That's how we scraped through to A status.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I do want to ask you though, we're looking back at, say, even the choice of people like Musa Hitam and Abu Talib, as individuals, did they provide a kind of bridging between an authoritarian system and government that perhaps would be reluctant to deal seriously with human rights issues to something like an independent commission? That in fact you needed to gain trust, and you needed to do it by getting people who are on your side, but perhaps are much more sensitive to global conversations about human rights and the need for Malaysia, especially as it had global ambitions, you know, on a diplomatic front. Would you reconsider the skepticism of the past?
So I think the skepticism was valid based on the personalities that were in the commission. I think even presently, honestly speaking, I think it's time for an open, transparent manner of selection of commissioners now. We have a 5-person committee, but we do not know what are the competency tests check. We don't know who are the committee members. It should be made public. I mean, public should know who's the selection committee. So when we go back in time, there was a lot of questions on who this, at one time there were 16 commissioners. You had a big bunch of commissioners, but they never spoke the human rights language, never defended human rights against the tyranny of the state, if that was a word at that time, much more. And I think that's the role of a commission, to advise government on which is the right way to go. Whether government follows you or not, that's another point. But you had to stand up to that test.
Okay, talking about competencies, we've got about a minute and a half. How many people actually, I mean, you actually have a degree, you have a master's degree, a postgraduate degree in human rights. How many people even have that? And is it really necessary? If you come from a trade union background or a women's groups background, do you really need a degree?
So the competency is not to have a master's in human rights. I don't think that is the test. But the test is coming, one of the tests of Paris Principles is to have a diversity of personalities on the commission, which means people who have an understanding of human rights. You can come from any field, so you must have a mix of government, trade unions, NGO, private sector, legal background, academic. You should be open to all, not meaning you need to show your degree, but you should be able to withstand the test of being standing independent, to speak against any groups that violates rights without fear or favor. I think that's a culture that has slowly changed, and I want to congratulate that commission under Tan Sri Hasmi Agam. After the amendment to that law, he took the helm with his set of commissioners, Jenny Lasimbang, James Naigam, and the set of, and Professor Kaur Lekti. I think they did a sterling job to rebrand SUHAKAM, and I think from that crew of 16 to a tight team of 7 was, I think, the start of a serious looking SUHAKAM that would take on much more than what it did before.
Right, okay. We'll come back with more on empowering SUHAKAM after this break. Stay tuned to Consider This.